So I finished the first season of The Bear and have 3 episodes left until I finish season 2, so I'll be saving my season 2 thoughts for another video. I have a couple complicated feelings I want to establish before we get started, so everyone knows where I'm coming from. I used to work in a kitchen. My job was primarily to wash dishes, but sometimes I was asked to do other things. The actual work itself wasn't that difficult, but what made it difficult was the stress it brought out of my coworkers. So the fights you see in The Bear, while not exactly what I went through, thank God for that, definitely give off a lot of the same tone of that environment. Which on one hand, props to the show for capturing what that environment is like, but on the other hand, this show tends to spark up my anxiety a lot. I am constantly reminded of how uncomfortable that working environment was when I watched the show, which has made watching it difficult at times. That being said, I do love a lot about this show, so let's break it down. Starting with Carmy, who is in desperate need of therapy, he's really interesting in both the positive and negative influence he has on the cast. On one hand, he inspires everyone to step up their game and improve, where at the beginning of the show is established as a system, which is basically stagnancy that has literally caused the restaurant to fall apart. No one here wants to change because they are comfortable as things are, but things are not functional. So Carmy has to, quote, change the chemistry. He starts enforcing proper structures and roles to keep everyone organized, which actually starts to work a bit. Unfortunately, he also brings a lot of stress to the environment, which results in a lot of conflicts being resolved in yelling matches. He tends to be very uncompromising and kind of a massive psycho. One area where this bites him is right at the beginning of the show, where he throws out the tomato sauce, which we learn at the end of the season had all of Jimmy's money in it. Carmy does have quite a few wholesome moments with the cast, especially with Marcus, who he really inspires to take up baking sweets. A very special moment I remember from this season is when he hears about Mikey from Tina. Tina recalls where Mikey had gotten angry, and Carmy assumes that that was how Mikey ran the place because that's how he runs it. However, Tina counters this by explaining that that wasn't how Mikey behaved, which contradicts everything Carmy assumed about this leadership position. So I really appreciate the balance of positive and negative traits he brings to their dynamic, which is better explored in other characters. So moving on to Sydney, who is basically the only competent chef aside from Carmy, and because of that, stressful leadership positions are forced onto her. At first, this dynamic is horrible because it reinforces the cast's dislike for her, 1, because she is new, and 2, because she is Carmy's bootlicker and nobody likes him. But this begins to change as Sydney starts to win everyone over, primarily Tina, who actually comes to respect Sydney a lot. I thought their whole little dynamic was so wholesome, and for Sydney, part of her realization is that this person she admires is kind of a massive prick. Carmy has the shortest fuse in the world and explodes at people. Sydney starts to have a sour but more human view of who Carmy is, and as the saying goes, don't meet your heroes. I appreciate the respect Carmy shows Sydney, and she was definitely important in balancing out a more positive perspective on Carmy at the beginning, since she was the only one who liked him at first and encouraged people to be inspired by his skills as she was, although a part of that was basically forcing other people to validate her feelings. So Sydney's actually a really nice character. Moving on to Ritchie, who is currently my favorite character after season 2, but still really good in this season. He is strongly against the restaurant changing, which we find out is because he's afraid that he won't be able to contribute, thus resulting in him being kicked out. I really love how every character's place in the restaurant acts as a parallel for past conflicts they haven't confronted. For Ritchie, it's his divorce with Tiffany. He's afraid of being rejected from this environment, much like how his marriage ended. It reinforces his lack of self-respect, which causes him to butt heads with Sydney and Carmy a lot. In one episode, Ritchie and Sydney have to go pick up materials to fix the wall, which acts as a clear metaphor for their dynamic. Ritchie wants to help, but refuses help from Sydney, which causes him to get the wrong thing, where Sydney manages to get the correct one. A reflection of how Sydney seems to contribute to the restaurant, but Ritchie doesn't. Even the fact that Ritchie is driven by Sydney reflects how he can't be responsible to take the wheel of leadership. Another great moment comes when Ritchie tries to resolve a conflict between a group of people with his gun, but then Sydney does it better by giving them food. And lastly, there is the season finale where Sydney finally snaps at Ritchie and tells him everything he feels, that he has nothing to contribute, and Sydney makes him feel worthless by comparison. It even has a direct metaphor when Ritchie walks into Sydney's knife, because the idea is that Sydney's words actually cut into Ritchie and hurt him, which sets up his arc nicely for season 2, which I'm so excited to talk about. Probably my favorite moment is when Ritchie goes on a date and tries to tell a story that his family loved, but she just finds annoying, and then when he tries to tell it at the restaurant, he only ends up in the way, which was super heartbreaking, where their past dynamics benefited his behavior. So Ritchie is fantastic, and I'm excited to talk more about him in season 2. Next up, I want to talk about Pete. Pete is an interesting character because he really exposes how toxic the Brasato family is, where their dislike for him primarily comes from the fact that he is a good person, and the rest of them are not used to that kind of positivity. It also highlights a contrast between Carmy and Sugar, where Sugar is trying to escape their toxic family life by being with someone positive like Pete, where Carmy has decided to throw himself back into the flames of hell with his restaurant, which in season 2 we learn is pretty much just as bad as his family life. Pete is such a ball of positivity, and him sticking up for Carmy and telling him that he was proud of him, you can see how it throws Carmy off guard because he isn't used to that kind of positivity. Pete is wonderful, and I love him. Marcus is another one of my favorite characters from the show. He's the first person, aside from Sydney, to really respect Carmy. I love how since he's the nicest character, he is literally characterized as the guy who makes the sweets. I really love the moment he has with Carmy about putting out fires, where Carmy is trying to make Marcus feel better about blowing the fuse. It was such a sweet moment between the two. I'll have more to say in season 2, but for now, I love the positive energy he brings to the show. The last character I want to talk about is Tina. Tina's arc happens in the blink of an eye. She starts off very arrogant, refuses to speak with anyone. She sabotages Sydney's soup, which made me really dislike her at first, but after Sydney shows her up by fixing her dish, you can see how it makes Tina so insecure, but then she encourages Tina by complimenting her mashed potatoes. It completely turns Tina's opinion of Sydney around and makes her more passionate about cooking. I absolutely loved it. My closing thoughts are that I genuinely like the show. The way the restaurant is used as a metaphor for the characters' personal conflicts outside of work. It has a really strong and interesting cast of characters, and I also really like watching food get made. I'm taking my time with the show because, as I said before, my anxiety isn't great, but I am looking forward to talking about season 2 when I finish it, so thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.